Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is the fifth and final film of the Indiana Jones franchise. Executive produced from its original creators George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. This was directed by James Mangold, director of films such as Logan and Le Mans 66, or in other names, Ford v Ferrari. And the film sees the return of Harrison Ford for the final time as the much beloved and related archaeologist and adventurer Indiana Jones. Archaeologist Indiana Jones races against time to retrieve a legendary artifact that can change the course of history. The Indiana Jones films have been part of my life since my childhood. I have rewatched them so many times and I never get bored of them. They have been an inspirational for my love of filmmaking. And to be honest with you, with the character Indiana Jones, he is my favourite hero film character of all time. With the trilogy being Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, and The Last Crusade, I adore all three of those films. Full of fun, charm, personality, and of course action adventure. And sometimes there is a bit of horror. Then there is Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which came out 15 years ago, which is insane. I remember seeing that on the big screen. That film has its moments when it's good and sometimes bad. Now with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, I thought this film was flawed. I think it has its issues, it's not perfect, but I thought it was fine. Please be aware that I'm going to be talking spoilers in this review, as this film has been out for a few weeks now, so I do think quite a lot of people have seen this film already. I loved the opening scene of Indy 5. It is presented with excellent pacing, editing, action, comedy, and that familiar classic Indiana Jones that we all remember. With the de-aging of young Indy and even young Mads Mikkelsen, I thought it was fine. It's not perfect. There was a couple moments I could tell it looked a bit off, but I have seen worse before, so I have to say I do think Disney and Lucasfilm did a fine job with that aspect. Regarding the acting of this film, and to start off with, Harrison Ford. And I thought for the final time he was fantastic in this film. From someone at the age of 80 now, being 79 when this was filmed, he still shows so much care towards this character, and I can tell, like many others, he loves playing Indiana Jones. He really loves it. If you've seen interviews of him talking about playing Indiana Jones, he loves playing this character. He's always loved it. He's had so much fun and he's grateful. And for his current age, he obviously can't really do the action scenes like he used to in the previous films, but I thought he did a fantastic job with the more dialogue and emotional scenes. But in the end, he absolutely smashes it. Mads Mikkelsen as the main villain, I thought did a great job. From the use of his body language and facial expressions, he knows how to perform as a threatening presence. His motivation in this film is pretty simple, it's pretty familiar, but it felt classic Indiana Jones. A villain wants something to have full power and control. All the other villains have done this in the previous films. Toby Jones, Antonio Banderas and Boyd Holbrook all did a fantastic job in this film, considering a couple of them do have minor roles in this film. Phoebe Waller-Bridge as Indiana Jones' goddaughter, I thought did a fine job from her performance. I never found her annoying. I never felt that she was replacing Harrison Ford as another Indiana Jones. You know, any of that silly rumour stuff that's been going around before the film was even released. I would say that her character is complicated. Bridge actually said that to the Hollywood Reporter, and it's due to her at one point being with and then against Indiana Jones. When she is with Indiana Jones to help and go and find her father's research and to complete what he was finding. And then there is the other side of her being a con, being someone who just wants the dial for money, to basically show that she's really a character that we've seen before in the previous films who just want something for money. I'm going to give a really weird example here, but think of Ray Winston from the previous film, who was at one point with Indiana Jones and then against him, and he's just there for the money, just to be a greedy person. So I do think, like Ray Winston in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the writers didn't really know what to do with Phoebe Waller-Bridge in this film. And if they maybe stuck with one side of her, I would have been fine with it. The action scenes in Indy 5 were fine, nothing edge of your seat or unforgettable. I thought the chase scene in Morocco was pretty decent regarding the camera work, editing and creative choices from Mangold's directing when chasers were crashed and killed off, which I do think James Mangold's strength in directing is chase sequences. Now with my mixed feelings of Indy 5, I would say from a setup level, this film is pretty strong. However, when the film is executed, it's pretty weak, unfortunately. Such as Indiana Jones being old and depressed, in 1969 going through a divorce with Marion, losing his son who lost his life in the Vietnam War, in addition towards Indiana Jones being retired from teaching, which is meant to be a good thing, but from someone who would be very passionate about their subject, they wouldn't know what else to do with themselves anymore for their purpose. And now with himself being surrounded in a time where there's just been a moon landing for a celebration, and the Vietnam War that's been happening. And it shows that his time and era is now coming to an end, and he doesn't really feel part of the world he is living in. Which now brings me to this film's final act about the time travelling. Now at the start, like many others, I was feeling very concerned about this direction, and exactly whereabouts in the past were they going to go. But how it was handled though, I did feel curious and relieved. Being in the Roman times and having Indy meeting the maker of the dial. Going back to Indy being old and down, this moment made me feel Indy is grateful meeting someone in his subject line, and would prefer not wanting to go back to a reality where he doesn't feel needed anymore, and would prefer to die in the Roman times. Which shows from James Mangold's explanation about this film being about aging and time. So I do think from that example I just discussed, it shows that the setup is very strong in this film, but it is the execution that is pretty weak. As this doesn't help from the film's plot being all over the place, the pacing being choppy and clunky and sometimes really rushed, and it's a work in process of this film that the makers had to make instead of them wanting to make another Indiana Jones film. Now with my issues of the film, I did feel that the final act was rushed, not appreciative, and from when Waller-Bridge's character punches Indy and knocks him out and brings him back to 1969, again it shows the problem of the execution from the film, about Indy for his love of history and archaeology. And if you look at an example like The Last Crusade, when there is a moment when Indy is about to decide to either have the MacGuffin or to save himself, that is a brilliant example about Indy's obsession for his subject. Also, it makes that part to be safe and clean because it's Disney. It's not really a proper Lucasfilm and Paramount production. I was also not a fan of how the villains were used and killed off. It was never satisfying and just played it safe. For example, one of the villains being this massive and huge guy, and you're probably thinking, oh, I think there's going to be a fight scene between him and, well, stuntman Indiana Jones, not Harrison Ford. And you look back to all the previous films, there has always been a moment when Indy would fight some really bulky and muscular guy. But the way he was killed off being handcuffed underwater by the character Teddy, which I'm going to discuss later, was just being wasted and disappointing. Now with this character Teddy trying to be the new Short Round, there is a scene when he flies a plane. And there is one scene, it's actually the introduction of him. You do see him being surrounded by these instruments where he's been given a lesson of flying a plane. And that does show some learn and experience before the character Teddy does fly a plane. But with not learning and trying actual plane tools made the landing of the learn silly, and I was just not buying it. My final issue with Indy 5 is sometimes the film doesn't really show that familiar tone and charm of Indiana Jones, except the intro and the final act of the film. Again, it goes back to the makers not wanting to but having to make another Indiana Jones film. I would say the first half of this film is not as good as Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but this has a better second half instead of Indy 4. Now, I know the time travelling moment is ridiculous. However, I didn't find it as dull as Indy 4 with a bunch of aliens. And of course, this is not near as good as the trilogy. No way, Pedro. But in the end, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is flawed, but fine. I didn't see this as a crime against cinema and one of the worst films of the year like some others are saying. I was never bored. The cast, the acting, the set pieces all did a fine job. And with the ending of Indy reuniting with Marion had a sweet and peaceful ending, showing it is officially an end of an era. Based on my Letterboxd rating, I'm going to give Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny a 3-star out of 5. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this review. Please let me know your thoughts of the film in the comments below. And if you liked what you watched, feel free to subscribe and look out for more videos coming your way.